Hello, this is Cicero, and I want to do a quick video discussing something that Ben Shapiro said in his show yesterday. I'll leave a link and a timestamp to the video of what I'm talking about and what he said. Now, on this video, he was talking about Trump's comments regarding Rob Porter and how Trump asked, is there any due process in this country? And in that, he stated that due process was for the judicial system, that the assumption of innocence was important for jurors and those that are part of our justice system. Now, this being said, I would strongly disagree with Ben Shapiro. And the reason this is because the assumption of innocence is just kind of a basic thing that all of us should do. Whenever there's an accusation against anyone, we should assume their innocence until we have evidence that shows otherwise. And the reason of this is because it is impossible to prove a negative. It's impossible to prove that you are innocent, that you didn't do some sort of crime. And the good examples of this is if someone accuses someone of raping them, you can't prove that you didn't do it. You can refute any evidence that your accuser brings against you. Like if your accuser said, oh, it happened here at this time, you can say, well, I wasn't here at this time, I was doing this. That's proving a positive. You can't prove a negative. You can't prove that you didn't do something. All you can prove is what you've done. And so this is important, especially with things going around with like the Me Too movement, where women are coming out and making accusations. They need to have proof. We need evidence that shows that what they're saying happened. Because otherwise, you just have accusations coming against someone, and if we just assume guilt, all of these people are guilty and have no way of proving that they didn't do it. All they can do is defend themselves from evidence against their accuser. And if their accuser is not bringing forth any evidence of a crime being committed, then how can someone prove their innocence? And that's a question I would have for Ben Shapiro. How can someone prove their innocence other than refuting evidence provided by their accuser? And if that is the only way to prove your innocence is by refuting all the evidence of your accuser, why wouldn't we have an assumption of innocence as a general policy for the entire public? We can't be running our society off of the assumption that whoever accuses anyone of a crime, they're guilty until they prove their innocence. They are innocent until they are proven guilty. This has been part of human justice and is a very basic concept. One of the oldest codes of law, the Code of the Hammurabi, states this as the very first principle of this code of laws, that people are innocent until they can be proven guilty. And that until they can be proven guilty, they shouldn't suffer any sort of consequences. And the Code of Hammurabi, the punishment of falsely accusing someone and then imprisoning them without the evidence to show that they are guilty was punishable by death. So it's really an important thing to justice. It's a very basic principle. And to say that, oh, that only applies to our justice system and not the general public, means that you're going to have a general public that will just go out there and ruin people's lives for no reason, without any sort of justice. And we've seen this. We've seen this at college campuses where women on college campuses accuse men that are going to school there that they were raped by these men. These men say, no, we never raped her. There was no evidence provided. No concrete evidence provided by the accuser, and because of that, they were kicked out of school. They were banned from going to the college. That's a major setback in their lives, and they were later exonerated. That there was no evidence to prove that they had committed the rape. Yet they've suffered. Their names have been smeared by the media, and they have issues in their life, getting a career and going on. And this is because there wasn't an assumption of innocence by the public. And so to say, well, we're not going to, the assumption of innocence isn't important for the public to have, is a dangerous idea that will lead to many injustices when people are accusing others of crimes. And in this society that we have today, where things like Me Too and multiple accusations on college campuses, it's important to keep that ideal strong, that people are innocent until you can prove that they are guilty. We should not just assume that when someone accuses someone of a crime, that person committed the crime. We should assume that that person is innocent until there is evidence that shows and supports that a crime was committed. Now, the examples Ben Shapiro used as examples of why this is the case was cases like with Hillary Clinton. That is not the same that is against the assumption of innocence. There was evidence provided showing that Hillary Clinton committed a crime. We had evidence. It wasn't just an accusation being made. We had, with O.J. Simpson, there was evidence. Even though he was acquitted, there was evidence that he committed a crime. And so to a jury, I mean, he wasn't convicted of the crime, so the jury thought that he was innocent. But I mean, there's at least evidence provided and a defense was made for O.J. Simpson. And you can, at that point, determine whether or not it proved his innocence or not. But the assumption is that when someone is accused of a crime, there needs to be evidence proving that that person committed the crime before we say that they are guilty or that they've committed a crime. Otherwise, we could be ruining people's lives for no good reason just because we want to believe the victim. And this is something that's going around with feminism and victims of sexual assault, that we just need to believe the victim, that when they make an accusation, it is a legitimate accusation, and that we should just assume that the person that they're pointing to as their abuser committed the crime, and that we should just take the victim's word for it without any sort of evidence. This is wrong. We should assume anybody who has been accused of any sort of crime is innocent until we have evidence that shows the contrary. And this is just an important principle for our society, to have a just and equal society. And I'm not meaning equal as an equal of outcome, but I'm talking about just true equality and justice for all. And I mean, because Ben Shapiro has been a target of this, that he's been accused that he's a Nazi. We don't assume that he's a Nazi just because someone points a finger at him and says that he's a Nazi. And I mean, you look at the proof, you look at the evidence, what people say why he's a Nazi, they're just accusing him of it. And he can counter any point, because when you say that someone's a Nazi, you're assuming that they have certain ideals. How he counters that is by proving that his ideals are not in line with being a Nazi. He's not. The accusation comes with its own set of evidence that tries to point out that you believe in certain things like fascism, and he can prove that he's not a fascist by espousing his ideas. But if he was accused of some other sort of crime, it would be imperative that we assume that he is innocent until the evidence is brought forth to show if he committed the crime or not. Because if we just assume, if someone came out with some sort of rape accusation against Ben Shapiro, we wouldn't assume that he committed rape. I mean, he's a just based on his character, I mean, that would cast doubt on the accusation to begin with. But even if it's someone who's less, trustworthy, has less of a good character from what we know of them, we would still assume innocence, just like what we give to Ben Shapiro, because that is the right and just thing to do. It's not a matter of how the public acts, because the public acts like there's no assumption of innocence. But in order to have true justice, the public should act like there's an assumption of innocence until evidence is brought forth to prove that someone is guilty. And that's just my 2 cents on it. Like I said, I'll leave links in the description below. You can hear what Ben Shapiro said and, take it as you will. But as someone who has a background in law, to say that the assumption of innocence isn't important for the public, I find to be very disturbing, and maybe it's just a mistake on Ben's part where he misspoke, but he seemed to be very adamant that we can, as a public, assume guilt without there being evidence provided first. And if that's not the case, I'd like to see him come out and say, maybe I misspoke or wasn't clear on what I meant. Because the assumption of innocence is a base foundation of a just society. And if we've gotten to the point that thinkers like Ben Shapiro are saying that it's not important, then we're no longer living in a just society if that is no longer the case.